Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is Sarah McAbee, wife of political prisoner Ronald McAbee, former Williamson County deputy. A little bit about Miss McAbee. Her story begins with a personal crisis that evolved into a national dialogue when her husband was apprehended following the events of January 6, 2021. Amidst this turmoil, Sarah found her calling to be the voice for the voiceless and stand firm for those who could not. Co-founding Stand in the Gap, Sarah dedicated herself to supporting January 6 defendants and their families, ensuring they never felt isolated in their struggles. As the Chief Operating Officer of the Real J6, Sarah tirelessly works to highlight the plight of these individuals, advocating for fair treatment, due process, and the protection of civil liberties. Her journey is not just about addressing the immediate needs of January 6 defendants and their families, but also about fostering a society that values justice, empathy, and the freedom to stand up for one's beliefs. Sarah McAbee's story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the unyielding belief in fighting for a cause greater than oneself. Thank you for being with us tonight. Sarah, how are you doing?
Thank you for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I know you're very busy and we've got a limited time here. We want to cover as much ground as possible, so we'll go right into the questions. I read over your website and I've read about Ronald, your husband's trial. To me, it's a good example of how rogue our government has become. I mean, this is third world banana republic type stuff, what happened with him and pretty much all the other people involved with J6. I think probably the bad apples that were involved with that were probably either on the left trying to foment that situation, or they were probably feds, would be my guess. So tell us about what happened with your husband exactly.
So our story started a little bit before January 6th. He was a Williamson County sheriff's deputy, and he was coming home from work in December of 2020, and he rolled his truck 12 times and should have never made it out of there alive. That's actually the only reason he was able to go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, because a friend at the time had invited him to go, and he was on medical leave. And so it wasn't a very popular thing in our household, but as you know, you pick and choose your battles when you're married. And I simply didn't want him to go because of how he was physically, because of the car accident. But he had every right to go. He wanted to hear President Trump speak, and he certainly didn't know how the day was going to unfold. And so they started that morning and went over to the Ellipse to hear President Trump speak. And then, as you know, President Trump had said, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard and march on to the Capitol. And so that's where he went. And he found himself at the Lower West Terrace Tunnel, never went inside. And it was a mere 7 minutes of his life. He saw an officer that was down in distress, and him being a fellow law enforcement officer, he went to aid that officer. When he was aiding that officer, he saw off to his left, Roseanne Boylan was being beaten by Metropolitan Police Officer Lila Morris. So he was yelling at her and quite literally said, "Stop killing that girl." And he slid down the stairs with the officer as the protesters had a hold of the officer's legs. And he was communicating with the officer. He said, I'm one of you. He said, I know, help me up. He rolled him over to his side, helped him back up to the line of duty. When he got back to the line of duty, my husband went to find Roseanne. They decided to move her body back to the line of officers. He started to give her chest compressions, and they dragged her away like she was a dead animal. So the crowd kind of dispersed. He's just standing there in mere disbelief of what he had just witnessed. And there was a third officer, Stephen Sagimont, that saw this entire thing go down. And he thanked him twice for his help that day. And then he put his arm around him as the crowd surged and said, "I got you, man. All right, I got you. Just calm down." And then after the crowd had dispersed, again, there was a civilian that came and got him and took him to a medical tent for help because he got hit in the head with a baton in his interaction with the police. And 7 minutes of his life that you would have thought when he came home that he would have been awarded a medal for running into action, just as any law enforcement officer would do. And instead, on August 17th of 2021, the FBI raided our house and they took him. And he has been incarcerated ever since.
Good Lord. So he didn't even make it inside the Capitol. He was outside, just trying to help.
Outside. Yes. Yeah. And it's all on camera. The entire 7 minutes is on camera. And it didn't matter. The officers took the stand. The officer testified saying, I did thank him for his help that day. And it just doesn't matter when you're in DC and you were talking about, people don't understand the gravity of January 6th. They might think of January 6th and how the bad actors were out there and the three-letter agency workers and all of that. But what happens inside these courtrooms is also egregious. What is happening in our nation's capital by the prosecutors and the judges, it is truly a kangaroo court.
Wow. So the officer that told him he had his back did actually testify in support of him during the trial, and that just really didn't mean anything in the big scheme of things.
Correct, because when you go in front of a jury, you're judged by a day on the calendar versus your actions that day.
Wow. What did they actually charge him with?
So he has 6 felonies and a misdemeanor. Every time he went to pick up the officer, they charged him with assault, and then he has civil disorder. And because he was wearing motorcycle gloves that didn't have a shred of metal in them, never even used them. The prosecution even admitted that he never used them. They used that as a dangerous or deadly weapon. So every assault charge was now heightened. And so all of his misdemeanors also turned into felonies.
Good Lord. I mean, I like to say, this is third world stuff. I mean, this is gulag. This is the Soviet Union type garbage. So eventually he got 6 years, and so he'll be released in 2026, I take it?
Yeah, so he was held 26 months without trial, denied bond. Actually, in the Middle District of Tennessee, he was granted bond by Judge Chip Frensley, but the prosecution didn't like that answer, and so they appealed, and the case went to Washington, D.C., and that is where not only was he called a terrorist on record in a bond hearing, he was also denied bond and held 26 months, and then he went to trial in front of a jury of not anyone's peers, and, we watched that entire process go down, and one of the most egregious things specifically about his case is the prosecution on the second day of deliberation sent back evidence that was never admitted into court. 70 pages worth of text messages was sent back in a binder. And the jury had a question. That's the only reason we knew it was back there. And we had filed for a mistrial, which should have been an immediate mistrial. But the judge called each juror back in one by one to ask them to unsee what they had saw. And then a few hours later, they came back guilty on all counts. And then he was held for another 4 months before he got sentenced. And he was one of 9 on a case. 8 of them had been sentenced, or 7 of them other than him. One of them had passed away in this process. And he was sentenced the highest. He was the only one that took it all the way to jury trial. And he was the one that was sentenced to the highest.
Wow. So much for a speedy trial. So much for a fair trial. How is he holding up?
It's one day at a time. He's finally off in federal prison and hopefully at his final destination. This will make, I believe, his 10th facility he's been in the last almost 3 years. And so we're praying it's a good facility. He's getting his feet wet there.
Right. So during or since then, have you received any help from any Tennessee elected official, federal or state?
No.
Have they even talked to you, contacted you, offered?
No, they won't even meet with me.
Good Lord. Do you have any idea why?
It's too political. It's career suicide.
Just to meet with you?
Yeah, it's January 6th. You slap January 6th on anything and people just run for the hills. It's an atrocity to say the least. But, when it comes to elected officials, they will talk about it. There's like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. I'll give kudos to Matt Gaetz and Troy Nehls for actually stepping up to the plate and somewhat paving the way for these individuals. But there's other individuals like Marjorie Taylor Greene that'll just use it as a photo op, and we're political pawns. But in this election season, we have to learn how to play the game, because unfortunately, this is still going on 3 years later, and lives are being destroyed. There's 1,400 January 6th defendants across America, and over 220 of them are incarcerated. In Tennessee alone, there's 27 Tennessee constituents that are affected by January 6th.
And as you know of, they haven't helped any of these constituents here in Tennessee.
Correct.
Our elected officials, state or federal.
Correct.
Good Lord. And you said there's 27 incarcerated in Tennessee, or from Tennessee, 27 from Tennessee that are incarcerated.
Well, there's 27 people in Tennessee that have been affected by January 6th. Not all of them are incarcerated. There are a handful, probably, I would say about 7 or more that are currently incarcerated.
Right. And then, of course, you got all the families. I mean, that's multiply 27 by whatever, and that's a whole lot more. And, talk about insult to injury with no elected official even reaching out to see what they can do, or just, hey, how can I help you? Talk to you, something. That's pathetic. That is pathetic. So I guess maybe in your frustration, that's what led you to be the co-founder of Stand in the Gap. And what's the mission of Stand in the Gap?
Yeah, so Stand in the Gap is our nonprofit. And the reason we started this nonprofit actually goes a little bit further back. So I was co-founder of the Real J6. And through the Real J6, we just wanted to give a voice to these individuals, because the ones that were being housed in DC, nobody wanted to talk to them. Nobody wanted to interview them. And so we would hold weekly Twitter spaces, and they would call out from the facility, and they would be able to tell their story in their own voice, whether it was about their case, about their family, what was currently going on in their life, about the gulag, living conditions. We would do call to actions and try to get the community involved. And shortly after we'd started the Real J6, we learned that there were a lot of holes in this community that weren't being met. In particular, with visitation, these individuals were denied seeing their loved ones for 2 years, right on 2 years, simply because of COVID mandates that they had in the facility they were housed. They didn't even have video visits. And so after Troy Nehls went into DC in January of 2023, they finally granted them in-person visitation. And they were ecstatic for a very short period of time. And then they realized they couldn't financially afford it. And so we launched what we call Operation Love Wins, where we fund for families to go visit their loved ones that are incarcerated. And through that process, that's when we learned there were a lot of needs not being met in this community, because individuals didn't want to touch it. Other nonprofits didn't want to touch it because it was too political. So we started Stand in the Gap. It's a 501c3. So we moved our visitation program over to that. And we also do appellant attorneys, because in Washington, D.C., there's a 99.6 conviction rate among January 6 defendants. And so we were asking ourselves, why were we funding defense attorneys when they were all getting the same outcome? And so that's when we decided to fund appellant attorneys. So anybody that took their case all the way to trial, we would now fund their case to go to the next level, to the circuit court. And there's other things that we also want to do with Stand in the Gap, but those are our two main things that we have realized have affected January 6 defendants.
So you mentioned that they were able to, at some point, through video conference or Zoom or whatever, communicate what they were going through. I'm actually surprised they allowed them to do that. But when in the process did that happen? Is that more recent?
No, that was just over the phone. They were just allowed to call out on the jail phone. And, they did it. They cut the phones off. They would take away their privileges, but they weren't going to silence them, because they wanted to get the truth out about what was happening in that facility. Actually, at one point, the U.S. Marshals came in and condemned part of it and shipped 400 inmates out of D.C., but none of them January 6 defendants.
So obviously you need donations, and anything else that you can think of that how people can help with this mission?
Yeah, so there's a lot that people can do. In this fight, you're either fighting the beast itself, which is the federal government, or you're feeding the people that are fighting the beast. And so for us, it is monetary donations to get these families the help that they need. At any point. I know for myself, it's cost me about $1,500 a month for my husband to be incarcerated. So not only do I now have a bill of $1,500 a month to clothe him, to feed him, to communicate with him, and go see him every once in a while, I also lost an income. And so these families are struggling out there. So there's family services that we do to help with emergency funding. There's a lot of things that, the community has to step up. These individuals have sacrificed so much. January 6 defendants, they've sacrificed a lot. I mean, their families have been destroyed. A lot of them have been destroyed mentally, emotionally, physically, financially. And then if they can't break them in those ways, they try to break them physically. And it's a sad thing to watch. And so our goal with this is to not only shed light on what these individuals are going through, but ultimately in the long term to ensure that this never happens again to American citizens.
Absolutely. You said it costs you $1,500 a month to clothe and feed him?
Yes, you have to pay for everything. When somebody is incarcerated, they'll give them one or two jumpsuits. You have to pay for their undergarments. You have to pay for their shoes. You have to pay to feed them because in facilities, they have a calorie threshold they have to meet. But quite literally, there is cake on every tray. A breakfast tray has a piece of cake, a lunch tray, and a dinner tray because they don't feed them nutritious food. They just feed them food to hit their calorie requirement.
Do you know what that calorie requirement is?
Probably next to nothing. I mean, they feed them a hard-boiled egg and toast for breakfast. For lunch, they get a bologna sandwich every single day, and for dinner, they get rice and beans.
Good Lord. Okay. That comports with federal law as far as for prisoners? I mean, that's hard to believe that is standard across the board for federal prisoners.
The problem is the oversight into these prisons. There's next to nothing into the accountability for these federal facilities. Even the county and the city jails that they're held in, technically they're in U.S. Marshal custody until after sentencing, and then the U.S. Marshals will hand them off to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But the problems don't stop there. Sometimes they get even worse if they go to a medium or a high facility.
Wow. So how many, do you know, are they all mostly in one prison, or they've just got them scattered about?
So most of the individuals held in pretrial detention were held in Washington, D.C., and then they were shipped out to the Federal Bureau of Prisons where they went on a little journey until they ended up in their final destination. But it just depends. You know, the Federal Bureau of Prisons is supposed to keep them within 500 driving miles, but there's different stipulations that go into that. My husband is almost 800 miles away from us.
How often are you allowed to visit him?
In the new system, I have not seen him yet. The last time I saw him was at sentencing in the beginning of this year. Since he's been incarcerated, I have seen him 7 times in the last 3 years.
Wow. Anything else that you'd like to add or let everybody know about?
I tell people they need to get involved on a local level, right? There's 27 Tennessee constituents. That means there are 27 families. I just recently heard one of the families that they're getting a divorce, which is not uncommon in this. You know, your loved one has been ripped away from you. You have no idea what the end in sight looks like. It's just a horrific thing. And people do need to get involved. They can't sit on the sidelines anymore with where we are as a country. You know, you had 104 million people that voted for Trump, and we're sitting here now being persecuted by the federal government, wondering where those patriots are. We can't sit back and be keyboard warriors anymore. We have to step up and we have to do something. And it's different for each individual person. Each person has a different skill set. You know, you either have time or you have money. So you can donate money or you can donate your time to try and move this needle forward in this fight for justice, because we're just average Americans. I mean, the best way to explain it to people is you go to church and you pick row number 19 and you tell every man to stand up, whether they're 18 or they're 78, and you immediately rip them away from their families. And so these families are just trying to learn how to survive.
Now, on your website, does it identify the families, or does the help just go to you and then to the families? How does that work? Can you sponsor a specific family or anything?
We could help facilitate that. Yes, we don't put their information out there just in the general public to protect them, but we do have an internal database that if somebody wanted to reach out and sponsor a family, or, you know, there's different things that you could donate to on our site. We also offer grants for people. There's 3 different grants that we offer that people, January 6 defendants, can apply to. So if there's January 6 defendants that you know of, we're out here to help and all the ways that we can. We're constantly trying to innovate and figure out ways to not only move this needle, but to alleviate the burden that these families should have never had to endure.
Have any candidates, you know, maybe those that are challenging incumbents, have any of those reached out to any of the J6 families that you know of?
No.
Okay. Yeah, this is, I mean, this is not what our country's supposed to. This is not what all those people fought and died for and risked themselves for. So this
no, I mean, there's multiple tiers of justice when it comes here, right? I mean, before what we've talked about with the colleges just recently, you know, you look at the Summer of Love. In 2020, you look at when they had taken over Washington, D.C., when Trump was inaugurated, all those things were all on federal grounds. And they either arrested those individuals and released them and dropped their charges, or they never arrested them at all. Yet we still have people today being arrested. Matthew Graves, the district attorney, has come out and said, we're going to arrest another 1,000 people. And they absolutely are. They're not going to stop. They have an endless budget with the Department of Justice.
Wow. Here's the thing, too. This is tyranny. This is just flat out tyranny, cut and dried. Everybody knows it. And, we say, well, how bad is it going to get and what's going to happen? Everybody's hedging, Trump's going to get in there and fix everything. Well, I got news for you. Even if he's allowed to get in there, okay, if they don't cheat him out of that, that's not going to fix this our problems are too deep. So the only way to fix these kind of problems, and it's really disgusting to me and infuriating, that the states haven't stepped up. It's not just Tennessee that's been spineless on this. It's apparently every other state in our country. So we wonder how bad it'll get. It will get as bad as every state lets it get, which means it will get as bad as we allow our states to let it get. As long as we allow them to say, well, that's terrible, I hope we get better people in our federal government. Our states should be fighting this. That's one of the things that a state is supposed to do, is make sure that the rights of their citizens are protected, and not just let federal agents show up and haul people off to D.C. This is just infuriating. So I appreciate what you do. I'm definitely going to be donating. I wish I was a deep-pocketed guy. I'm not. But I will definitely do something, and I would encourage everybody else out there to find, and let's put the websites back up so everybody gets a good look at those. And, go on there and read the stories and find out more. And, hey, if you're not a deep-pocket person either, but you've got talents or other things that you can provide, then I'm sure they'll take any help they can get. But hey, I really appreciate you being on. Sorry for what you and all the families have had to go through, and for all the J6ers. My thought is, as I said earlier, I suspect that most of any bad actors at J6 were probably lefties, or they were fed plants, would be my guess. So I just, this is really infuriating. But hey, thanks again. God bless you and everybody that's helping your organization, and love to have you back on sometime.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us a platform.
Absolutely. Glad to do it. You take care.
You too.
All right, I'm going to do a little bit of commentary, and then I will do the announcements after that. Guys, I want to touch on this just a little bit. It's like I said, it will get as bad as our states lets it get, which means it will get as bad as we will allow. We have to hold our state accountable. We have to hold our representatives accountable. Now, I've heard from other sources that, she mentioned this was toxic and that they were scared, the elected officials are scared. They're scared that, and this is what I have heard, and you probably heard something similar, that, the intelligence agencies, if any of these elected officials try to make too much of an issue of this, or try to get involved too much with the J6ers, that next thing you know, they're going to have kiddie porn on their computer or whatever. Now, some of them, I'm sure, have other things they could be blackmailed for, legitimate or otherwise. Excuse me. But we can't go on like that. We can't go on as a country. We're not going to stay free like that. And I don't know how to say it other than we have to change the way we see our government. We can't allow our state to tell us that's the feds, there's nothing we can do. DC will never fix DC. If you think Trump's going to go to DC and fix DC, you're delusional. He may do some great things. He will be a leaky tourniquet at best, and he's only got 4 years. You can't fix this screwed up country in 4 years. You can't do it. The institutions are all corrupted. And our state's pretty bad as well. But we have to hold our state elected officials accountable for what they allow the feds to do to us, pick a topic. This is obviously one of them, one of the most important ones. But if you think about it, every major problem we have, now I think all the major problems we have in this country have a moral basis or lack thereof, and that's what led to the problem. But if you think about the political issues, most of them flow from DC down to the states. States have a responsibility to stand up and push back. Otherwise, they're complicit. And our state's complicit. We're complicit because we have weak governors like Bill Lee, like Bill Haslam, like most of the governors in our country. And we have weak legislators who just want to say, well, there's nothing we can do. It's the federal government. And they actually believe that our founders created this country to have the federal government dictate everything to us. No. Our states created the federal government. The federal government is a creation of the states. The federal government didn't create the states created the federal government. They answer to us. But we're going to have to make that happen. This is going to take some effort on our parts. The first thing is we have to change our mindset and stop believing that the federal government is supreme in any damn thing it wants to do. The Constitution lays out enumerated powers for the federal government. And oh, by the way, none of those three-letter agencies are covered by the Constitution. That's not going to change unless we demand it change. States are the only way to fix our federal government, and they're not going to volunteer to do it. We're going to have to make them do it. It can't happen overnight, but I'll tell you what, like I said earlier, we're all potential J6ers. So we all potentially have a cell waiting in the gulag. People better wake up, stop betting on Trump to save the country. And I'm not anti-Trump. He's done some great things. He's endured a lot, but he's endured nothing compared to what these families have endured. So we need to change our mindset and stop accepting anything that comes from the federal government that's not constitutional. Stop accepting this crazy notion of any federal law is supreme to any state law. No. Constitution lays it out. I'll give you another perfect example of that. Today I read where a law passed in Tennessee. I think Jay Reedy was the House sponsor. I can't recall who the Senate sponsor was. And basically, they wanted to make sure that our National Guard could not just be federalized anytime the federal government wanted to, that there had to be either a war declared or they had to be called up to actually put down a rebellion or other things in accordance with the Constitution. And what does our AG say? Well, he doubts the constitutionality of it because of the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is an act of Congress. It's not a constitutional amendment. And so he would allow, in his mind, well, if Biden wants to call up all the National Guard to do anything and everything, he can do that. We won't stay free very much longer with that mentality, guys. You don't stay ignorant and free indefinitely. We've been ignorant a long time. We're about to lose our freedom. We better wake up. Got a few announcements, and then we'll close the show. Also, a little disclaimer, I'm still having some vision issues. That's why I'm having to read these off rather than look at the teleprompter. Yes, I use a teleprompter. You don't think I memorized all this stuff, do you? Okay, let me get caught up here, and I apologize. Okay, if you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you'd like to broadcast on this show, please send information to TennesseeInformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. If you want our state, and I'm going to repeat myself here a little bit, if you want our state to stand up to federal overreach, the best way to do that is support the nullification process bill sponsored by Senator Bowling and Representative Halsey that they intend to bring back next session. Visit tncss.weebly.com/call to action and sign the petition and download paper copies of the petition to have other people sign as well. Our state senators and reps need to know we want this legislation passed when they return in January. Also, now is the time to get candidates for state office on record as well. DC will never fix DC. Only the states can fix DC, and we have to demand that our state stand up to DC and enforce the Constitution. Now, I need to clarify something that I said yesterday in reference to these petitions. Go to the site, follow the instructions. These petitions you sign, whether you sign them online or whether you download them, have them printed out, I think there's like 18 lines per copy or whatever, and you send them to an address on the site, because what we're going to try to do is collect them all over the next 10 months and have hopefully thousands or millions to give to the legislature, to give to Representative Halsey and Senator Bowling when the session starts off. So just to clarify, but if you just go to the website, if you go to the tncss.weebly.com/call to action and just follow the instructions. Also, the Gibson County Reagan Day Picnic is Saturday, June 8th from 4 to 7 p.m. Tickets are $50 per person. May 25th is the last day to buy tickets. Ribs and chicken with all the trimmings here on the menu. The guest speaker is Mr. John DeBerry, Senior Advisor to Governor Lee, one of the few decent people that work for Governor Lee. The event will be held at 88 Spring Creek Highway in Medina, Tennessee, home of Alicia Owens. Visit the website, gibsoncountytngop.com, to get your tickets. And I believe that is just about all. By the way, we are trying to do more shows per week, so we are still going to do a show every Tuesday, at least one show. We may do two, and we will have some shows on Monday. And I apologize here. Yes, okay. All right. Appreciate everybody tuning in and take the time to watch us. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss a show. Visit our website, tinformer.com, to sign up for our weekly newsletter, stay up to date. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Just search for Tennessee Informer. We are also on Spreaker.com as well. Please share us with your friends. Our guest on the 14th will be Joanne Bregman, and she will be sharing about how our Republican supermajority has catered to illegal aliens here in Tennessee. You don't want to miss that. Hope you'll join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.